Welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds, getting you ready for Game 1, Dallas, Edmonton at the American Airlines Center. And today we're going to talk about this upcoming series with our good friend of Spits and Suds, David Castillo of D Magazine, also his terrific Substack. Please subscribe to it. It's a great way to support David and all that he's done for Spits and Suds. It's called Star Stack. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good, doing good. You know, the Dallas Stars are once again in the Western Conference Finals. Hopefully the third time is a charm and a familiar foe as well.
Yeah.
So that's always fun because it adds to the quote unquote bad blood. Even if there's no bad blood, you know, just it's a cheesy talking point that sometimes can bear fruit.
Well, it's also interesting that maybe we haven't talked enough about the dominance of these two teams as far as the Western Conference is concerned.
Yeah, it's you know, they've had like there are two teams coming in with like serious momentum.
Yeah.
You know, between Dallas, you know, taking out the President's Trophy winners in Winnipeg and Edmonton just oh my God, like mopping the floor with Vegas. That was something I did not expect.
Yeah.
Especially did not expect back-to-back shutouts for Stuart Skinner after that LA series. So yeah, like I don't really kind of know like where to start with this other than to give Edmonton the respect they deserve, which maybe they didn't get last year.
Yeah. No, that's true because last year was one of those kind of St. Louis Blues-like runs where awful first half or struggling first half, fired the coach, in comes Knobloch, and you have this massive resurgence all the way to the Stanley Cup final. This year's been interesting because they faced some pretty good injuries throughout the year, and it seems as though as the playoffs are moving along, they're getting stronger. And one of the concerns, because you look at the Stars, David, in that first Finn line, obviously effective, but I'm thinking about depth scoring. Yeah, Sam Steele did score last game, but you know, the Sagans, the Bens, the Duchesnes, the Marchments, and then I look at Edmonton and their third and fourth line and what they did in the Vegas series with Kane, Adam Henrique, and Connor Brown. I mean, arguably the third line of Edmonton was their best line. Not Draisaitl, not McDavid, but that third line. And then Corey Perry all of a sudden. Where did this come from? Corey Perry scoring 5 goals and 11 points. So that third and fourth line, the acquisition of Trent Frederick, has been impressive, and their physicality as well. So it's interesting because we mentioned on the program yesterday, but I think there's a lot more depth than we saw last year in the conference final.
Yeah, which is the ultimate irony, right? Like Edmonton lost like critical depth
Yes.
in Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, and then just kind of like weeds, you know, managed to kind of sprout up. You know, by the way, you know, again, like just I don't know what to tell you, Gavin. Like the Vasily Podkolzin erasure, that is just unforgivable. He's another guy. Like when I think about their depth, like he's a player that I think deserves a lot of credit as one of their best forecheckers. And it's funny how it's just like I think both teams are coming in with a complete reversal of how they came into last year's series, where Dallas had depth in special teams. They kind of like they have special teams and their depth hasn't really showed up yet in the playoffs. Whereas Edmonton, the depth has showed up and their special teams are completely like just lagging behind. And yeah, I think for Edmonton, I think another big part of their kind of improvement is just the fact that their blue line is the Jake Wallman ad was fantastic. And John Klingberg,
yeah,
much as it pains Stars fans, I'm sure, has been a fantastic ad. So all of a sudden they have a blue line that like from 1 to 6 can move the puck up ice. And that really kind of further leverages and emphasizes how strong they are on the rush. I mean, this is something that I talked about in my preview at the Star Stack. Did a lengthy preview. It's probably like a 10 or 15 minute read, so it's not really worth your time, especially if you don't want to
always
go through a bunch of
worth
stats.
Everyone's time.
Well, I mean, but so here's like the big difference, which is that Colorado, right? When you look at the stats, excuse me, when you look at the stats, Colorado was not actually a good rush team. yes, they could beat you on the rush, but they didn't generate a lot of chances off the rush. Edmonton is the total opposite. Edmonton can beat you on the rush and they generate a lot of chances on the rush. So I'm really fascinated by how Dallas is going to handle that because like personally, like I'm again, you know, don't leave Gavin a bad review. Just leave me a negative comment on Twitter, which is that this I'm kind of a skeptic when it comes to the Stars because I do worry that their lack of possession, which they haven't really had in the playoffs, is something that could bite them. Do I think they can win? Yeah, absolutely. However, it is something that I'm just kind of curious about, and one of the things that I have a few doubts when it comes to, especially their blue line, which I think with Miro Heiskanen getting up to speed, that's going to make a big difference. But I am curious, whether or not they're going to stick with the 11-7 thing or eventually go 12-6, and also what the pairs might look like. Do they keep Lindell and Cece together? Do they split up Harley and Heiskanen? Like, I think these are really interesting and important questions
Yeah.
within this matchup, precisely because Edmonton has the ability from line 1 through 4 to really kind of control territory.
Yeah. Well, let's also mention that Matthias Ekholm might come back in this series. And he's a real good defenseman for Edmonton, but you're right. The defensive pairings have been absolutely terrific for Edmonton, even despite the loss of Ekholm. That 11-7, 12-6 situation, am I wrong, David, by saying that Pete DeBoer would likely go with 12-6 because you need that forward to keep up with this Edmonton team?
I don't know. That's a tough one because I think you've seen like some kind of like loose dividends where with double shift and Rantin in and that I mean that's something that's obviously like an advantage to the Stars, right? Anytime you can get Rantanen out with
Yeah.
other lines be on the top line, that's a benefit. However, I agree with you in that like they really need to get the chemistries with the forwards going, because to me, like your blue line's going to take care of itself. You're going to have Harley Heiskanen, Lindo with CC, and then probably Bixel with Labushkin. I know people like Petrovic, but he's going to be the odd man out if they do go 12-6. And I think the advantage there is that you still have the option of double shift in Rantanen if you want, but also I think it's important for Dallas to really get some of these forward chemistries going because they really haven't had that. And again, this is not me like necessarily being critical of Dallas's forwards. They're still an elite group, easily the deepest in the playoffs at this point, the deepest in the entire NHL. However, one of the things you've seen them struggle with is just broad possession. And if they can find a way to get, especially the Johnson line, which Johnson's had the tough matchups. I wouldn't expect Johnson to be productive and a shutdown defenseman. Like he's or shutdown, kind of Bergeron type, shutdown forward. I think he's grown into that. He's starting to excel, but it's still a lot to ask at this age. And so I do think it's important for them to kind of really figure out the best combo for the Johnson line and maybe even break up the, Sagan, Marchment, Duchesne line. They've been pretty good. They're at 53% expected goal share. So they're kind of broadly controlling the shot quality battle, which is a benefit. I do think Duchesne is going to score. He's not going to shoot 0% the entire playoffs, and he's been getting chances. But I'm just not sure that line should be sacred. And so if they do go 12-6, hopefully there's a concerted effort to kind of, maybe get, those lines below the Hintz line going.
Well, one of the interesting aspects, and I completely understand, and I agree with Stars fans' philosophy on this, is that if Mikko Rantanen's not scoring 2 goals, having 2 assists, we see him double shifting, and we're like, well, are we exhausting him by double shifting? And I would think, David, that Pete DeBoer and the coaching staff would see that and make that change back to 12-6 if that was the case.
No, that's a good point. I think ultimately, though, it's just kind of, Ranton is kind of used to this, right? I mean, even though I do think there is a, fatigue factor, especially if the series, goes 7 games, that it's something that like he's more or less kind of, been used to. It's something that I think he can. I think the real thing is like, did we see Rantanen? Did we see his performance kind of suffer as a result? I don't really think so, but to be honest, I didn't pay attention to kind of Rantanen's effectiveness, in the last game, just because it was the Mikael Granlund show, right? And that top line, I think, has really been kind of it's the thing that we all want to see, and it's a talking point that I think we all like to emphasize because, well, that was Dallas's strength, their offensive depth. However, if your best players are supposed to be your best players, and that's how you win games, well, then what does it matter? If Granlund and Hintz and Rantanen are the only ones scoring and Dallas is still winning, then I think, Pete DeBoer is just going to kind of use that as a formula all the way to the, cup finals and, a potential championship, if need be. Now, I don't think that's how Dallas is going to beat Edmonton, because that's the thing, right? If anybody can compete with star power Rantanen and Hintz, it's Edmonton with McDavid and Draisaitl. And Draisaitl, it should be noted, has become a fantastic defensive forward. Like, I mean, this year was, he's always kind of had elements, but this season in particular really kind of developed into that sort of Selke light kind of player. And so I'm fascinated by what Edmonton does also in response, whether or not they keep Draisaitl and McDavid separated, which they did towards the end of the Vegas series. And man, they were good. Like, Kasperi Kapanen of all people,
Yeah.
and Podkolzin looking great next to Draisaitl, with McDavid next to Nugent Hopkins and Perry at times. Like, there are different looks Edmonton can give Dallas as well. So what adjustment is going to make the difference, right? Is it going to be Edmonton splitting up their stars? Is it going to be Dallas, double shifting Rantanen, or do they have something else in their pocket? I would personally like to see Robertson with Johnson Duchesne personally. Like, I think it's one way to get Duchesne going and also kind of adds that speed that can also help Robertson going, because it's important to remember. I mean, like, Robertson is also, he has 1 point. Yes, the injury has slowed him down. But I think Robertson in particular is going to be really crucial to the series, not just because Robertson is one of Dallas's best forwards, but also because he has the profile to really, Edmonton, they have kind of mostly smaller defensemen, puck moving defensemen. They can scramble out. However, hem them in their zone with, Robertson's big body and his puck protection. And that is absolutely, kind of one of your generic keys to victory.
I wonder also, like, I was thinking, why not go back to the regular season with some of these depth scoring struggling? Why not? And I know Marchment's struggling, but why not go back to Sagan, Marchment, and Duchesne? Why not go to then take Robertson and put him on the third line with Jamie Benn and Wyatt Johnston? Why not, like, go back to that familiarity that you had during the regular season?
Well, I think because, like, the regular season was sort of, with the injuries, it was kind of hard for, the lines to develop maybe the chemistry that you would expect, which never really kind of popped up. You have individuals that obviously, produced and generated well. But I think at this point, we think about the playoffs and how the margins for error are so slim. It's really crucial that, that these lines, aren't just getting goals, but are getting territory and possession. And so I don't know that there's really like a good answer for that. I think it's just something that the players have to figure out kind of on their own. And it's something that they're going to have to figure out, with, Edmonton's very kind of unique style, their high pressure style. And so I think a lot of this is really going to depend on, yeah, sure, whether or not, Dallas gets the forward lines correct, but really whether or not those forward lines are able to kind of support the blue line, which I think is really going to be, really going to have the most pressure on them, at least in this series.
One would think with two straight shutouts, too, they would have to get some traffic in front of Skinner.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of just your classic sort of, playoff style, like, in the same way that Dallas was able to kind of penetrate Hellebuck with traffic to the net. You're going to want the same thing with Edmonton and Skinner, especially because, Edmonton doesn't really have the blue line to kind of, box or front out players like Robertson and Rantanen. And so, so yeah, like I just it's the goaltending battle is fascinating because I think Skinner gets a lot of because he has such wretched games. It's easy to forget that over the last 3 seasons, he's actually been pretty good. When you look at his expected goals
Yeah.
saved above expected and things like that, he's actually been really good. He's been pretty much as good as Odger. Now, does that make him a better goalie? No, of course not. But just that, Skinner does deserve respect as I think, broadly good goaltender that just has some wretched games. And so it's yeah, like I don't I mean, I think we can all like say with confidence that Ottinger is better than Skinner, but that's these battles don't happen in a vacuum, right? It's all about, well, in the same way you pointed out how Dallas gets traffic in front of Skinner, well, how does Edmonton get traffic in front of Ottinger? How do they, Ottinger, kind of quote unquote, weakness is, getting him to shift and slide. And if Edmonton can kind of move east and west on Dallas's defense, well, then that's also going to be something, their plan of attack as well.
Yeah. It was interesting right after the game when Jake Ottinger was interviewed talking about Edmonton. You could see that he was looking forward to that series. And a fired up Jake Ottinger is what we love. He'll never show it emotionally, but you can tell. And I love how he's taken his game to the next level. Not that he needed to go that far, but I'm glad he's being talked about with other goalies in that same circle. Like, when people are talking about the Dallas Stars, they're not just talking about Mikko Rantin, they're talking about the play of Jake Ottinger. And I think that says a lot. It's kind of weird to say that Jake Ottinger probably has to be his best in this series against Edmonton with their scoring threats.
Yeah, it's you just really can't say enough good things about Ottinger and kind of, not just from like a mechanic standpoint. Kevin Woodley, who does great goaltender analysis for NHL.com, has kind of written about, his development and Stars fans can attest to this, right? Like early on, if there was a breakaway, Ottinger was going to give up that goal. And that's just not the case anymore. And so you're seeing a goalie that I think has really hit his stride, and I think that's the biggest positive sign. Like regardless of what happens in the series, whether Dallas wins or loses, and of course, Stars fans don't want to think about what happens if they lose because I do think they have real potential to meet say Florida in the Cup Finals.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the biggest development is that Odger really seems like he's become the goaltender that people always kind of more or less profiled him as, but statistically, he kind of didn't really meet those standards. And now he's meeting those standards. So this is a player that's not just going to give you a performance like this year, but next year and beyond.
I guess it's kind of fascinating. I don't think it's going to be a difference maker, but just looking at the East versus the West, I mean, when Florida takes off from Fort Lauderdale Airport, they can't even get to 30,000 feet, or maybe they can real quick, and then they have to head down to Raleigh. I mean, that's a quick flight. And then you look at Dallas, Edmonton, there's some traveling involved.
Yeah, that's fatigue is a real factor, and I think there even been statistics done on kind of the effect of travel on like teams and team performance, kind of following that travel. Um, but but I mean, I feel like the sort of the stuff happening on ice is grueling enough that I think Dallas is not just like prepared for it, but it's something that they experienced last season. And of course, the big difference, right, which is that Dallas is actually leveraging their home ice advantage this year,
Yeah.
right? That wasn't the case last season. So yeah, it's a factor, but I think it's just kind of it's in the same way, right? The Toronto Maple Leafs aren't losing because of fan pressure.
Sure.
Dallas won't lose. I mean, I get why it's a talking point, but I think it's kind of for that same reason that I don't think travel is going to kind of be a factor. It'll just be something that kind of one more obstacle that teams have to deal with,
Right.
which they're kind of used to in these playoffs.
Well, on that note, it did create or enhance the fan narrative. You hear that with the Dallas Cowboys here in DFW. if the Cowboys just concentrated on football without everything else going on, they'd be great. And for Matthew Tkachuk to come out and say what he did, that, if Toronto could concentrate on hockey without the other distractions, like in Florida, we just play hockey. I mean, that just added to an already massive narrative up in Toronto.
Oh man, it's like I gotta admit, like the Toronto Maple Leaf stuff is like my personal like Real Housewives. Like I can't, like I just have to like ingest, every bit of media and criticism and outrage that I can. But I don't think it's not. I wouldn't say it's insignificant, because players have agency over where they go, and if if all you hear is about like how terrible a certain place is, then you're just less likely to want to go there. Does anyone honestly think like that won't factor into whether or not Mitch Marner comes back?
Yeah.
I'm sure it will. He's like, and by the way, I would bet, because Carolina's going to have so much cap, I would bet they're the team to win the Mitch Marner sweepstakes.
Oh, that would make them tough. Well, two things to that point is that, like, in Dallas, sometimes people say, like, nobody talks about the Stars. And my response is okay, like, you're hearing a lot of Sebastian Aho talk. No, you're not hearing Carolina talk. And they've had great successful runs in the playoffs. Haven't been able to get it done, but that's one point. The other thing about Toronto, will Marner stay, or, the collapse of the Leafs? Why aren't more people talking about the loss of Anthony Stolarz? The guy was just really, really good in net, and then he gets bumped and he can't come back. Like, I always try to put myself in a Dallas perspective, and I think Spits and Suds listeners have to realize, like, okay, goes down, Casey DeSmith, really good. Casey DeSmith had a great regular season, but aren't we talking about the narrative? Well, if Jake Ottinger hadn't gone down, of course we would.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And well, to me, the biggest talking point there is, Florida's dirty play, right? That
100, yes.
You could say that, like, oh, Sam Bennett, like, didn't mean to elbow. Like, Sam Bennett has a lengthy history of this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And if Dallas meets Florida in the finals, like, you can bet that this is going to be another talking point, because it's been talking points for different players the entire playoffs, as it was last year and the year before. Don't forget Bennett's sucker punch of Marchand, the irony of them playing together now. And so that, to me, that's like one of the ultimate X factors in any Stanley Cup playoff run. Which is just kind of the dirty play. And yeah, like, I love the physicality of the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's part of what makes it unique. But I'm just done with this, like, oh, well, we're going to let certain things go because it's Stanley Cup playoffs. Like, hockey should be hockey.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have two completely different versions with different rule books to decide who is the best team.
Yeah. That said, David, I wanted to get your thoughts before we go, because I'm still thinking about that Steel breakaway and whether or not it should have been a penalty shot. To me, it was close. And the fact that it's close, I'm okay. And I'm granted they scored on the power play, so it didn't matter. But I thought it was close. And to me, and I know you shouldn't say at that stage of the game, but I just think if there was any doubt, you don't call it.
Yeah, no. I think that I think on that particular play, I think if it had been a regular season game, I think they probably call a penalty shot. But because it's Stanley Cup playoffs, and it's this is the end of the third period, it doesn't get called. But I do think you can make a case that, and I can't remember who the other Winnipeg player was, but was kind of like reasonably in Steele's vicinity.
Yeah.
So I think that was ultimately what they were looking at, and that's probably why they decided. But again, calls are very different, and something that if you look at statistically, right, which is that calls never happen the later in the series a playoff, a playoff contest goes, right? It's like you're more likely to get calls early on, which to me is actually quite essential for Dallas in this series. Try to draw penalties early on in the series and build on those power plays and hopefully build an advantage because you're not going to get them in games 5, 6, and 7.
Yep. The Substack is called Stars Stack. Appropriately, he is David Castillo of D Magazine. Are you still teaming up with Robert Tiffin on these post games on D Magazine, doing some quick writing?
Yes, sir. So I will. So Robert and I will be doing recaps. Of course, special shout out to Mike Palucci who edits them as we get them up. And yeah, so that'll be up after every game, and then of course I'll be doing recaps as well at the Star Stack, along with a lot of special stuff for paid subscribers, like film room analysis. I'll probably be looking at kind of like defensive zone breakouts on Dallas' side, and Edmonton's forecheck. How that interaction plays out. Along with other stuff.
I will allow the Palucci shout out, despite the fact that the guest contributor of Spits and Suds, Gavin Spittle, has not been allowed yet. Maybe someday. Maybe someday I can do my writing. It'll be Spits and Suds blog. There you go. You're a beast, my friend, and some cool stuff coming up on the Substack.
Yeah. The I'll be looking at some of the analytics as well.
Good.
And I'll be doing kind of what I like to call like light work, where it's just kind of a specific topic, but more like 300 to 500 words, so it's very readable on like, hey, like for example Matt Duchene, right? If he's not scoring through the first 2 games, is he somebody that's like due for regression? Is he going to start scoring, or is he someone that just is going to be snake bit the whole time, which of course I doubt.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. And shout out to D Magazine. I mean, what you guys are doing between you and Robert and Sean and the contribution, I mean, truly awesome that D Magazine has stepped up their hockey coverage and it's paying dividends for them. So kudos. My friend, thank you so much for joining us today. Terrific preview.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for another edition of Spits and Suds. We'll have more content for you prior to Game 1, and then we'll be on after the game. Game 1, Stars, Oilers, we are counting it down. The Frosties are in the fridge. They're ready for Game 1 victory. We broke the curse last series. Let's break it for the second time, and let's make it 2 in a row at home. Until our next podcast, have a great day, everyone.